In Alexandria at that time, there lived a man named Eratosthenes. One of his envious contemporaries called him Beta, the second letter of the Greek alphabet, because he said Eratosthenes was second best in the world in everything. But it seems clear that in many fields, Eratosthenes was alpha. He was an astronomer, historian, geographer, philosopher, poet, theater critic, and mathematician. He was also the chief librarian of the Great Library of Alexandria. And one day, while reading a papyrus book in the library, he came upon a curious account.
Far to the south, he read, at the frontier outpost of Syene, something notable could be seen on the longest day of the year. On June 21st, the shadows of a temple column or a vertical stick would grow shorter as noon approached. And as the hours crept towards midday, the sun's rays would slither down the sides of a deep well, which on other days would remain in shadow. And then, precisely at noon, columns would cast no shadows, and the sun would shine directly down into the water of the well. At that moment, the sun was exactly overhead.
It was an observation that someone else might easily have ignored. Sticks, shadows, reflections in wells, the position of the sun, simple, everyday matters of what possible importance might they be. But Eratosthenes was a scientist, and his contemplation of these homely matters changed the world, in a way, made the world. Because Eratosthenes had the presence of mind to experiment, to actually ask whether, back here near Alexandria, a stick cast a shadow near noon on June the 21st. And it turns out, sticks do.
All right, well, welcome to part one. Let's get this show on the road. We're going to start from the beginning, right? The ancient times. Now, of course, not the very, very beginning, like in Genesis, but the beginning of these mystery religion threads where you start to see them in ancient cultures, like the Greeks and the Babylonians and so on, and how they start to weave together through time, which is a very fascinating thing to trace. We're looking from about 600 BC to around 900 AD. So about 1,500 years worth of history. Most of the world believed in an enclosed cosmology, and we documented that in the previous episode on ancient cosmology. So if you haven't watched it, again, go check it out. Very clearly, most of the world, and in fact, up until, like I said, around 600 BC, around there with the Greeks changing some of the cosmology, most of the world, even the Greeks, again, all believed in an enclosed cosmology with a flat plane and local light sources. They had various takes on how it worked and so on, but ultimately it was all the same. So go watch that previous episode if you haven't seen it. There are a few exceptions, and those who were exceptions, like the later Greeks, and I say later because the earlier Greeks, like with Homer, they didn't believe in the cosmology that came later. The later Greeks, like Pythagoras, which we're going to document very well here, were neck deep in the occult. And that's why, again, you cannot divorce the occult from heliocentrism. You can't. Every instance, you will see for yourself, every person who developed this theory was an occultist. You cannot divorce the two. The Greeks were a major player in this particular evolution. We saw how Eratosthenes, in the last episode, made a fatal error by ignoring refraction, but nobody's ever called into question his experiment because the establishment doesn't want to do that. Obviously, they want to keep you deluded, because if there is refraction and the experiment needs to be done again, and you can get the same result with a local light source through a lens, what does that tell you? It tells you that the entire model used to explain reality is an illusion. And of course, that's the problem, because Eratosthenes didn't know about refraction. And I'm sure even if he did, he probably would have done the same thing that NASA does today, which is project their expectations onto reality and fudge the numbers and figure, oh, well, refraction is not that significant, and just mathematize the spell into your mind. Of course, NASA knows the truth. They know the true cosmology, and of course, so do all the people at the top. But they want you to believe a lie, which, of course, there's a purpose for that lie, and that's the whole point of today. It's designed to bring the world under the beast. Nevertheless, the Greeks' beliefs persisted throughout history because we're under the mystery religion, and Satan weaved what he started with people like Pythagoras into other empires, other places, and these beliefs traveled through time, through these various empires, and again, ultimately manifested in the Catholic Church. You will see it for yourself. So let's begin with Pythagoras, but a very important thing to remember is that, again, the Greeks in 800 BC, like around Homer's time, and some of those older Greek histories, originally had a similar cosmology to practically the rest of the world, and we documented that very well in depth in episode 3. Was it 3 or was it 2? I forget, one of those, but ancient cosmologies. Around the 6th century, it began to change with people like Pythagoras, who is a very key figure in this change, but he's also a very key figure in the occult and mathematics and science. So let's look at it a little bit about Pythagoras. This is from, I had to go on the Wayback Machine. This is actually the Theosophical Society. AU, I think that's, was it Australia maybe? I'm not, or Australia or Austria, one of the two. But either way, Theosophical Society. You won't find this link anymore if you just go to it because they took it down. But this was a presentation on the occult teachings of Pythagoras by Simon O'Rourke. There he is with a little boy, if you know what that's all about. But it says this: Pythagoras of Samos was an ancient Ionian Greek philosopher. He adhered to the teachings of Orpheus, studied under Thales, and in early life, realizing great exponents of philosophy, lived in exile to their birthplace, traveled widely to Chaldea, i.e. Babylon, Egypt, Persia, and India to seek the ancient wisdom. Later, some such as the 2nd century BC novelist Antonius Diogenes suggested that Pythagoras discovered all his doctrines himself by interpreting dreams. He began teaching at the age of 58, and about 530 BC, he traveled to Croton in southern Italy, founding an occult school in which initiates were carefully chosen before being sworn to secrecy. They lived together in an active brotherhood without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color, including married couples, practicing communal, disciplined lifestyle for many years. According to Iamblichus, many of these men and women, known as Pythagoreans, later gained renown in government, in the arts and philosophy for their contribution to society until later persecutions by the Catholic Church, which persecuted all of these mystics and basically absorbed them into herself. This talk will compare some key ideas of the Pythagoreans with similar ideas found in Theosophy. He taught that the principle or the beginning is in the universe, is in the universe unity, that justice is the mother of and the nurse of all things, that amity or friendship is equality. Equality is friendship. To act by everyone in the same manner as if you supposed yourself to be that one, and that one to be you, and to tread the middle way, to remember uniformly, mildly joyful, and not at one time hilarious and at another sad, and also to abide by the precept as duly by law, thy homage pay first to the immortal gods, then to thy oath, and last to the heroes illustrious. Most importantly, the spiritual path of the 2,500 years ago provided the same conditions and teachings for spiritual progressions today. So, was Pythagoras a very influential person in science and philosophy? Absolutely. Pythagoras was a key player in Satan's scheme because Pythagoras shifted the rest of Greek thinking for the long haul. And of course, Greek thinking was imported eventually into Rome, and Rome into the Catholic Church. So all of these things are one by one. Unless you understand how the dominoes are stacked together, you're not going to understand where you are at in the flow of time. And it's been a lot of time. We're at the end. So it's important to come to terms with these things. But Pythagoras was very much into the occult, and as you can see, very much a kind of antichrist in place of God as a savior in a sense, giving advice on how to basically walk the narrow road, but it's a counterfeit narrow road. And it seems good on the surface, and the Greeks who love philosophy were all about it. So this is from ProQuest.com. It's an academic paper. It's titled Pythagoras, the Cult of Apollo and the Birth of Philosophy. And this is a paper, let's see if the manuscript has been produced, yada, yada, quality. I don't think I can read anything here because you have to be a member, but I wanted to show you that there are papers about the cult of Apollo and the birth of philosophy with Pythagoras, because Pythagoras actually is the one, I believe, who coined the term philosophy, philosophia, which is the love of knowledge or the love of wisdom. But he had his own cult, and of course, that picture in the Theosophy presentation showed you he was with a little boy, which is very important to understand because these things there's nothing new under the sun, right? That people do today, people did 2,500 years ago. But this is from Transcend Media Service. Pythagoras and his theory of reincarnation. Let's see, by Igor Bucher, Pravda. The name of Pythagoras is known to all from school, but many people associate his name with a theorem in geometry, like the Pythagorean theorem. Meanwhile, this ancient Greek philosopher, mathematician, and mystic was the first man who coined such terms as philosopher and philosophy. He was also an advocate of the doctrine of reincarnation. Did you know that? The transmigration of souls. In some ways, he even shadowed forth ideas of communism. Of course, it tells you kind of where he was born and some personal things here, but they're not super important. As we know, Pythagoras left his native Samos and settled in Italy, which in ancient times was known as Vitalia. According to Timaeus, Pythagoras was the first one to say friends share everything, and friendship is equality, i.e. the common good. The communist principle of equality in the Pythagorean Brotherhood was conducted fairly consistently. No Pythagorean was allowed to own private property. They even shared such personal items as utensils for eating. It seems that even Soviet communal apartments or dorms did not have such rules. The origins of the communist utopia can clearly be seen from Plato's The Republic. In turn, Plato was heavily influenced by Pythagorean teachings. For the Pythagoreans, the authority of their teachers was unquestioned. So does this sound like a cult to you already? Of course it does. His statements, proven or not, were treated as ultimate truth. The Greeks loved to challenge everything, dispute begets truth, trying to find for and against arguments. However, when it came to the statements of Pythagoras, they fully accepted the words of their philosopher. Similarly, how Christians accept the words of Christ and Muslims. Yeah, it's not the same thing. This is a category error because Christ is God. Muhammad is a false prophet, and Pythagoras was also a false prophet. But Pythagoras was treated as a god, meaning they obeyed him as absolute truth. Kind of like how the Pope is obeyed today with infallibility. Same thing. Nothing new under the sun, folks. Always a man on the throne to lead people astray. The words of Muhammad, yada yada. Okay, the Pythagoreans, according to Iamblichus, ascribed Pythagoras to the rank of gods, as a good and humane demon. So a demigod of some kind was in their mind with Pythagoras. According to Pythagoras, the human soul can migrate from one human body to another, but also to the bodies of other creatures, such as animals or even plants. With each new incarnation, the soul loses the memory of the past. So every time we all live our lives it's as if we live for the first time. The man known as Pythagoras died in 497 BC in Metapontum, a town in southern Italy. So, did you know that Pythagoras was all about reincarnation and very much received as a god by his peers, and also influenced Plato, who influenced later thinking and communism and the Jesuits and so on and so forth. Do you see how all of these threads are woven into the ultimate deception? So Pythagoras had a cult that worshipped Apollo. We know that Apollo is Satan, just one of many faces that Satan puts on. Apollyon the destroyer. NASA loves Apollo for their missions, and we're going to see that quite a bit in a future section. Pythagoras had one of the first secret societies of the mystery religion with initiations and oaths and, esoteric, exoteric, that kind of stuff. He studied under mentors from Egypt and the East, like Orpheus, and I forget the other one, but he studied all the mystery religions materials from Egypt and from the East. They migrated into Greece through Pythagoras and other people eventually later, like Plato and Aristotle and so on and so forth. But all of these mystery threads, Satan is weaving into various cultures and empires because every empire has an expiration date. So Satan has to constantly move these things through these various empires, through people like Pythagoras, so that they can continue to exist and be repackaged. That's the enemy strategy. Remember that Egypt had sorcerers way back when Moses was taking people out through the Exodus. This was around 1500 BC, that Egypt had these sorcerers that could replicate certain miracles through their secret arts or dark arts. So we know that Egypt and the occult was, one and one. And of course, all these people today, trace their bloodlines back to Egypt and so on. And there's an obelisk in the center of the Vatican. So look, nothing new under the sun. It's all the same mystery religion, folks. But these things are very well documented even in the Bible. Pythagoras also was very communistic with the common good. And obviously he brainwashed people so bad that they even had to share utensils and they didn't think much of it. So we're talking hardcore, trauma-based mind control type of stuff, and cults, initiations, and all of the things that you know about today being done a long time ago. And Pythagoras was very influential in shaping the view that the earth is a ball, because he influenced Plato, and Plato was a huge figure in philosophy in many ways and Platonic thinking. Plato was obsessed with spheres. You're going to see that in just a second. He was obsessed with the sphere, not so much from a mathematical perspective, but as a philosophical conjecture. He was all about the abstract. And so he figured that the earth has to be a sphere. And of course, Pythagoras was one of the first to suggest that the earth is a ball based on the same thing, because they were occultists. The sphere represented the perfect, it was almost like an idolatrous thing for them, but it was the perfect shape. And so they figured, well, the earth must be a sphere. And that, of course, set the stage for other people like Eratosthenes, who came several hundred years later to be... Remember, Eratosthenes was the chief librarian of Alexandria, which was the seat of the occult. And so, go figure, these things just translated through generation after generation. But these things aren't based on science. Notice that not at one point were they doing serious science. They're just doing philosophy and conjectures and math. Math can mathematize anything. You could say the earth is a mug, and you could create all kinds of rules and shapes and things to justify that the earth is a mug. I mean, math is just a way to represent things. It doesn't mean it's the truth. And hopefully if you watch the episode number 4 with Eratosthenes, you realize that by now. You don't have to be a math genius. You don't even have to be good at math. You just have to understand that math, although, like, for example, 1 + 1 is 2, that's a true statement. Math can create true statements. However, a mathematical expression does not mean that you are reflecting reality. It doesn't. It doesn't at all, because it might be something else and it might be a different expression. And that's the whole point of that episode. So make sure you go watch that. Nevertheless, a couple hundred years later, around 400 BC, you had Plato. And he was obsessed with spheres and spherical things from a philosophical point of view. We looked at that in the episode on Eratosthenes. He believed that they were the symbol of perfection. So Earth being, created by the gods was also probably a sphere because it was perfect and so on. Plato was obviously very influential in the world with philosophy. Today we still have Platonic ideas like the immortal soul, but you could see where Plato got his ideas, and you could see where Pythagoras got his ideas of reincarnation from the East. These things are long, long threads, folks. The only way to know how the devil is going to deceive you is by studying history. It's like with the charismatic movement. I talk about this in the Great Delusion. In my series titled The Great Delusion, I go through thousands of years of history from all the way to Kundalini practice in the East, ancient times, thousands of years ago, to modern day charismatic NAR, quackery. There's an evolution there that is so profoundly meticulous. And you can see how just meticulous the devil is throughout history to move these threads through various people and to keep them continuing and repackaging them and moving them in this movement and in that empire and in that place and that and so on. And how the Kundalini spirit today that is taking over the world, the false counterfeit Holy Spirit, and it's manifesting through the Catholic Church, of course, who reined it all in because, again, the devil gave the Catholic Church his power and throne, great authority. The devil has to, if the devil wants to be worshipped, he has to actualize everything into one system. He has to. So meaning he has to pick something to be that system. And of course, he picked the Catholic Church. That's what the Bible tells you. Anyway, a little bit of a tangent. After Plato, you had Aristotle, 300 BC approximately. And he also believed in a spherical earth. He was very influential. And so by the time you get to Eratosthenes in 200 BC, who was, again, chief librarian of Alexandria, totally neck deep in the occult, he wrote a book on Plato. We looked at that. He very much idolized these people. He created his famous experiment with the shadows, but it was a total lie, and it was totally influenced by the occult teachings and beliefs that he had been raised with and that he believed. Now, of course, again, you could say that maybe if he knew refraction, maybe he might question. I don't think so. I think even if he understood refraction, he would have tried to fit it into his presupposed occult thinking, which is exactly what people do today. So there's that. A couple hundred years after that, another important development is the Vedic texts, like the Surya Siddhanta in 500 AD approximately. These are pagan sources, obviously, that a lot of Eastern mysticism comes from. I'm sure the East was corrupted long before the Surya Siddhanta. I'm sure that given everything we know, right, like with the mystery religions, like with yoga, the Kundalini spirit, all of these things, I wouldn't be surprised if the East believed in a ball earth and a rotating earth a little bit older than 500 AD. I would not be surprised. But remember that we saw some of those ancient cultures from, episode 2, I think, or episode 3, whatever, where we looked at ancient cultures and the Indian area, the East, believed in an enclosed flat plain. The question is, when did this change like the Greeks? The Greeks, again, with Homer, 800 BC, flat plain with enclosed light sources. And the gods were up there, somewhere in the sky, and you had a flat plain. That changed with Pythagoras. The question is, when did it change for India? Did it change in 500 AD or did it change a little bit before that? I'm not too sure. But you can see the devil going and integrating all of these different threads, changing it here, changing it there. Let's start flip. Let's get this momentum going. Let's get that momentum. And then they'll all intersect eventually into one particular vehicle, which again is the Catholic Church. But very similar to the Greeks, from truth to error. And they started pushing. You'll see as we go through some of these where the Muslim world picked up on these Eastern things because of their contact with the Indians. And they started talking about the revolution of the earth, and very, very interesting thing how it just, again, all comes together from different places. And unless you have that bird's eye view, it's so easy to just think that this is just a natural, spontaneous consensus of science, which of course is very far from the truth. Then you had this, the Hermeticism and the Emerald Tablet, which was around 700 to 800 AD. Of course, we're going to look at that. This is from Art, Science, and Design. Hermeticism, the nexus between science, philosophy, and spirit. Very interesting little article. Last week, I summarized the history of alchemy in Europe, the Middle East, India, and China. Alchemy is a tradition spanning millennia that influenced the development of modern chemistry, medicine, philosophy, and psychology. Western alchemy blends Greek, Egyptian, Islamic, and Jewish traditions, and it is a branch of Hermetic philosophy, which is based on the works of Hermes Trismegistus, meaning thrice great Hermes. This is a person, whoever he is, whether it was the devil himself or an amalgamation of various antichrists, that you need to understand his influence in this particular view of heliocentrism. because you will see him over and over again. It is debated why Hermes Trismegistus was called the thrice great, but it is thought that it is because he knows three parts of the wisdom of the universe: alchemy, astrology, and theurgy, the operation of the gods. Hermes credited the creation of astrology to Zoroaster, founder of the Zoroastrian religion, a Middle Eastern philosopher living sometimes in the second half of the second millennium BC. So again, these things are very old, folks. Hermes Trismegistus is considered the founder of science, religion, mathematics, geometry, alchemy, philosophy, medicine, and magic. Gosh, does that not sound like the devil's right-hand man? He is a combination of the Egyptian god Thoth of wisdom, learning, and communication, and the Greek god Hermes, messenger of the gods. There he is, giving you the false light and the dualistic occult scheme. Again, duality is not evil, folks. That's something that we need to get in our heads, is that duality is not evil. Duality is hijacked by the enemy. God created duality. God created the sun and the moon, night and day, yin and yang, left and right, up and down. And it's beautiful. It's the dance of life. But the enemy hijacks this to make himself look glorious and to make himself and his false gospel of being like God look like the truth. So these things are very ancient. The Egyptians, and of course, it continued on to other places like the Greeks and Romans and so on. He's also credited to have written somewhere between 20,000 to 36,525 works, of which 42 were kept in the Great Library of Alexandria, which was destroyed multiple times. Unfortunately, but against all odds, a small handful of Hermes' texts remain today, most of which are compiled into the Corpus Hermeticum. Against all odds, they just remained. It is said that Hermes Trismegistus received his divine wisdom in meditative trances. He covered topics such as medicine, chemistry, law, art, music, magic, philosophy, geography, mathematics, and anatomy. His knowledge was so vast and all-encompassing that the ancient Egyptians called him the messenger or communicator of the gods. Kind of sounds like Prometheus, kind of sounds like, again, that serpent in the garden that's bringing you the secret knowledge. Same idea, folks, just different packaging. Who was Hermes Trismegistus? Hermes Trismegistus may have been an actual living king, philosopher, and priest, as well as a sage, scientist, and sorcerer. Does this sound like a counterfeit of Melchizedek? Of course it does. He was known by many names, and he was considered to be an amalgamation of several people and mythological figures of ancient history. The main function of the various incarnations of Hermes is to transcribe the word of God, and his main symbol is the caduceus or serpent staff. Now again, this is coming from a theosophical pagan source, so it's not true. But notice the Antichrist, against Christ and in place of Christ. Historical and mythological figures associated with Hermes Trismegistus. Thoth, Egyptian paganism. Egyptian god of wisdom, learning, and communications. He is the scribe of the gods and was believed to have invented language, the alphabet, and writing. Well, God created languages. Remember at the Tower of Babel? Different languages. The Egyptian credited him as the author of all works of science, philosophy, religion, wisdom, and magic. It is believed that Thoth would have actually been an Egyptian priest, king, and philosopher who would have lived somewhere around 2000 to 1200 BC. Hermes, which is another influence. The Greeks identified Thoth with Hermes, the son of Zeus, and the god of science, commerce, language, and writing, as well as the messenger of the gods and the first teacher of alchemy. Hermes was also believed to be the inventor of astronomy, astrology, mathematics, geometry, medicine, botany, theology, and all branches of knowledge. Mercury, Roman paganism. The Roman adaptation of Hermes is the god Mercury, who is the patron of commerce. So you can see throughout all these empires, a new name, a new face. Enoch, Metatron, figure in Judaism and Christianity. Well, not real Christianity, but Kabbalistic Judaism for sure. Enoch is the great-grandfather of Noah, who ascends to heaven and becomes the archangel Metatron, celestial scribe. This is not true, because Enoch was given a peaceful death. And again, if you know the truth about the afterlife, watch my Afterlife series, you can see how these people are very deceived, because they believe in the Pythagorean Platonic mystery religion idea that your soul persists after you die. It persists because you can be like God, you're self-existent. And of course, if that's the truth, then all these fairy tales can come to life, like Enoch going to heaven, which he did not. He did not ascend to heaven. Jesus tells you in John 3 that nobody has ascended to heaven except the Son of Man. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that Enoch is disqualified from ascending to heaven because Enoch was before Jesus. It means something is lost in translation there, because reading it as Enoch ascending to heaven contradicts what Jesus says. We know Jesus can't contradict himself or lie. So that means something is lost in translation. And what's lost is that Enoch was given a peaceful death. Just like other people. Moses, Aaron, peaceful death, Abraham, peaceful death was given to people as a blessing. Especially in Enoch's case, he was a prophet and he was surrounded by Nephilim and corruption, and he was prophesying against it. So God rescued him and probably took him to a place, gave him a peaceful death, so that the next thing he would be aware of is the resurrection. But notice the fairy tales. Idris, prophet of Islam, synonymous with Enoch. Moses, Judaism, Islam, Christianity. Moses was an Egyptian prince of Hebrew heritage who lived in Egypt somewhere between 2000 and 1200 BC. He established a monotheistic religion in pagan Egypt, but was forced to exile. He's credited with writing of the Torah and the Ten Commandments, which were given by God through Moses. So again, this is what the occultists believe. Remember, if you've seen my Sacred Name documentary, you can see we document there quite a bit, especially is Yahweh a pagan god in that particular segment, that the pagans and the Gnostics, for them, they don't care. Whatever, they'll just bring in whatever god or figure from other religions and appropriate certain spiritual things to them. They have no clue whatsoever. So just because these people are importing Moses into their belief system doesn't mean that they believe in the Moses of the Bible. They're making their own counterfeit Moses, and of course, this is what the mystery religion does. It's a mishmash. Where God is one and consistent throughout history, the devil does the opposite, and he has many things, and it's a mishmash. That's the mystery religion. A couple more here. Akhenaten, he was a pharaoh from 1300 BC. He attempted to make pagan Egypt monotheistic under one sun god. His mother, Tui, was likely of Hebrew origin, and he was driven out of Egypt like Moses. The city with the most statues of Akhenaten is the city of Hermopolis, which is dedicated to Hermes Trismegistus. Nabu, Babylonian, god of writing and wisdom, scribe of Marduk, and keeper of the tablets of destiny. Now, so far as anything that I've read to you has to do with science. No, this is all occult stuff. So remember and keep this in mind. Here's the caduceus with the little snake on a pole. In modern day term, the term hermetically sealed is commonly used to mean airtight and impervious to gases. The word hermetic today typically means secret or sealed. Hermeticism was generally veiled in secrecy, and only those who were truly ready could receive the Hermetic teachings. Remember all this stuff, folks, because when we come to Newton, who was all about Hermetic stuff, and all these other people who are influenced by Hermeticism, you'll understand. Hermes is also said to have had magical powers that could seal a box or chest in such a way that it could never be opened. Hermes' symbol, the caduceus, is also the modern symbol of commerce and medicine. That's right, because we're still under the mystery religion. Hermetic philosophy. Hermetic philosophy or Hermeticism is one of the oldest religions and philosophical traditions. A synthesis of religion philosophy, which flourished in Ptolemaic Egypt. Hermeticism was not embodied in a single religious group, but instead it was a philosophical system that is at the root of many traditions, some of which are still alive today, with an exclamation point. Yes, of course, many are still alive today. Hermeticism is a blend of ancient Egyptian religion, philosophy, science, and magic with elements of Greek paganism, Alexandrian Judaism, ancient Sumerian religion, and Chaldean astrology and astronomy, and Zoroastrianism. It is a mishmash of beliefs. Do spirituality your own way, Cain style. It is associated with the philosophical schools of Platonism, Neoplatonism, Stoicism, and Pythagoreanism. I've talked about Platonism and Neoplatonism and their influence on the occult, belief of basically going to heaven after you die, having an immortal soul, in my Afterlife series. A lot of great history there. Hermeticism is said to hold Theologia, a doctrine that claims a true theology at the root of all religions that was given to man in antiquity. Hello, hello, forbidden fruit. The Hermeticists believe in one transcendent God and that all is one in the universe. Remember this too, the monad. We're gonna look at that quite a bit. Though they also believe in the existence of other beings such as aeons, angels, and elementals. Hermeticism influenced Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, especially the early Christian Gnostics, who were considered heretics. That's right, they were heretics. The devil was on both sides, the dark and the light, and you can see this throughout history, that it's been very pervasive. The destruction of the Hermetic wisdom. Much of the Hermetic and alchemical literature was destroyed, and the remainder shifted to the Islamic world in 400 and 600 AD, and eventually merged in medieval Europe into the Renaissance. Keep that in mind too. The Christians, starting with Emperor Constantine and his successors, erased almost every trace of Hermeticism from 312 AD until well into the 6th century. putting to death thousands of pagans, many of whom were Hermetic, and destroying temples and sacred texts. What did I tell you? That the Catholic Church judged the pagan system? God uses one wicked group to judge another wicked group. That is why every empire the devil starts has an expiration date, and he knows that. So he has to constantly move these things from one to another. As God is judging these pagans with other wicked people, with institutionalized religion, the devil is incorporating that into institutionalized religion. And then Rome becomes the seat of the occult. So it's just a constant move. But of course, God comes to judge everything at the end. But this is the ping pong dance over history. Being opposed by the church, the Hermetic tradition was forced to the occult underground and permeates Western esoteric traditions. This includes secret societies such as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Thelema, as well as modern paganism, New Age, and Wicca. Remember all of these because they're going to come into play. Developing the heliocentric theory, they will. The Theosophical Society, the philosophy behind the Waldorf Rudolf Steiner schools, is also influenced by Hermetic philosophy. Was there anything else That's right. Here's the Emerald Tablet, by the way. We're going to read a little bit about that. It's a reconstruction, but this is a very prized text to the occultists. The separation of spirit and science. While Hermeticism was influential in the rise of modern experimental science, part of the Hermetic tradition had to be repudiated in order for science to emerge. This includes a separation of science from religion and the spiritual world, as well as removing illumination as a way of obtaining knowledge. That's right. Science became atheistic. It became dark. And of course, the true initiates always knew the old, ways of thinking. And of course, through the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, you'll see as we get to that part in history, it was a resurgence of the old ways and a return back to the mystery schools. But moving on. Until the mid-17th century, natural philosophy generally described nature as an organic, dynamic, living, interconnected organism. There was no clear distinction between astronomy and astrology, alchemy and chemistry, science and magic. The scientific revolution separated these disciplines and brought a mechanistic view of nature, a focus on rational and logical thought, and a separation of religion and spirituality from the pursuit of knowledge, which, by the way, that wave, just like with communism, is coming undone in the present age through the quantum deception. We're going to talk about that. Through New Age, through all of these things coming back to uniting science and spirituality under the beast. It had to be separated so that it could be united. Just like the division between communism and religious nationalism had to create a false dialectic so that eventually it could be integrated. The same thing happened with science and is happening now as we are moving into the quantum New Age understanding of the world, which really is just sorcery. But moving on. In science, a phenomenon that is being observed is separated from the soul and the internal value system of the observer. When science observes a phenomenon, it assumes that its nature, the perceptual, is the actual. However, in the modern fields of relativistic and quantum physics, what was I just saying? Observation affects the process being observed with a different outcome than if the process were unobserved. In Hermeticism, that which is being studied is a reflection of the observer, and the two are intrinsically linked. This is central to Hermetic philosophy, as seen in the famous phrase, as above, so below. The universe is a symbolic reflection of what is happening inside ourselves. The quest for knowledge becomes a spiritual journey to return to a state of unity with the divine known as the great work of humankind. Didn't Aleister Crowley talk about the great work and how the great work will happen in the year of the snake, which is, I believe, 2025? That's coming up. You go, all are one, as above, so below. So this is what the occultists believe. Very, very important, because the Emerald Tablet is something that a lot of them, like Newton, were very much into. Newton actually translated the Emerald Tablet into English. This is Emerald Tablet on Wikipedia. The Emerald Tablet, or Smaragdine Tablet, is a compact and cryptic Hermetic text. It was a highly regarded foundational text for many Islamic and European alchemists. This is what you need to know, that as the Catholic Church judged the Hermeticists and paganism was crumbling, because remember, Satan chose the Catholic Church as his vehicle. We're done with this paganism thing. We can't be obviously against Christ. We have to create a counterfeit. So it's time to judge and destroy these things. Okay, well, God judges these pagan powers with Satan's counterfeit, and of course, Satan's counterfeit absorbs the secret knowledge. As these things are transpiring, the Islamic world is coming up through Muhammad. Muhammad happened around 600 AD, approximately. Visions from an angel of light. Creates a counterfeit religion, greatest false prophet in history, and absorbs all of these, mystery religion. Within I talk about this in my Did the Catholic Church Create Islam video, where after Muhammad dies, now Muhammad was a false prophet, but after he died, right after him, what's his name? Ibn Abdullah, I forget the guy's name, something Ibn Abdullah. Anyway, the guy who came in right after him was a Gnostic. He was actually a Jew, and he was a mystic, and he basically infiltrated Islam and brought Gnosticism, Manichaeism, which also was being judged by these new counterfeit powers to the Catholic Church through Constantine. All of these mystery religion things went underground into secret societies, and they migrated into Islam and eventually back into Europe and so on and so forth. Because the Crusades, gosh, there's just so much to talk about. The Crusades, when they went back in the Middle East, that's when the Templars cross-pollinated with the Kabbalah and the mystical practices, and they brought all that to Europe. And of course, Rome was already, in some sense, the seat of the occult after Alexandria was burned down. But it's just a constant cross-pollination. And so you can see these things moving and migrating to different places throughout history. But moving on. Though attributed to the legendary Hellenistic figure Hermes Trismegistus, the text of the Emerald Tablet first appears in a number of early medieval Arabic sources, the oldest of which dates to the late 8th or early 9th century. It was translated into Latin several times in the 12th and 13th centuries. Numerous interpretations and commentaries followed. Medieval and early modern alchemists associated the Emerald Tablet with the creation of the Philosopher's Stone and artificial gold production. It's also been popular with 19th and 20th century occultists and esotericists, among whom the expression "as above, so below," a modern paraphrase of the second verse of the tablet, has become an often cited motto. This is the translation by Isaac Newton. Let's read it. "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true, that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is that which is below, to do the miracle of one only thing. And as all things have been and arose from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation." So again, this is false light, folks. There's some truth here. Yes, there is one being that created all things. But this is lying to you about the nature of that being and how to be in relationship with that being. So that's why this is Antichrist. Spirit of Antichrist, folks. Didn't just start with the cross. The spirit of Antichrist against Christ, against God, against salvation has been around since the very beginning, since Genesis 3. "The sun is its father, the moon is its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, and the earth is its nurse. The Father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force or power is entire if it be converted into earth. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly and with great industry. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth and receives the force of the things superior and inferior. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. Its force is above all force, for it vanishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. So is the world created. From this are and do come admirable adaptations whereof the means is here in this. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegist, having the three parts of philosophy of the whole world. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended." So very sun-centric, very pagan, very occult, very fertility rite, dualistic type of stuff. But this is the Emerald Tablet. So that made its way into the Islamic world with the Islamic secret societies and the occult that basically migrated from Manichaeism, from Platonism, from all the Greek Hellenistic stuff. It migrated into these other places and eventually back into the Catholic Church through the Crusades. Do I have anything else? I do, but we're going to talk about Hermes really quick. Hermes basically will be popping up in a lot of places in this presentation, so I wanted to document who he is. Of course, we don't know who he is. Who knows if he was a real person or a combination of people? I don't have an opinion either way. I think he could very likely be just a combination of people, because pagans and mystics and the whole tradition is always about exaggeration. So I don't trust a word of what they say. However, you can see that they've taken certain things and twisted them to the truth. Yes, there's one creator, but they're not going to give glory to God. They're going to make a counterfeit creator. And of course, that counterfeit creator is Satan. So again, who knows if he was a real person? Again, he strikes me as a counterfeit of Melchizedek, a king and priest. Of course, we know that that was a picture of Christ. Whether Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate version of Christ or just somebody that the Bible mentions to you without a genealogy on purpose to paint a picture of Jesus, I don't have an opinion on that either way. I think he was likely probably a real person, the king and priest. But I'm not, 100% dogmatic on it. I think it could be either way. The point is that Melchizedek has both the office of politics and religion, spirituality. He's both heaven and earth, right? That is the priesthood that Christ follows in, the priesthood of an immortal life, that is ruler over heaven and earth. Well, Hermes Trismegistus, the pagans calling him a king and a philosopher and a priest and all this stuff, really basically what? He's all things, political and spiritual, which to me is a counterfeit of Christ. So it's very clear that there's some antichrist things going on there. He offers the forbidden fruit of self-salvation through alchemy and Gnosticism, just mystery religion, forbidden fruit from Genesis 3. There's nothing different. The devil has to show his cards, folks. And if you know the devil's cards, then it's easy to see right through them. He formed the basis for many scientific thinkers, including people like Newton and Francis Bacon and all these people who were basically part of the quote-unquote scientific revolution and, of course, heliocentrism. So Greek knowledge, who came from Egypt through Pythagoras in the East, eventually migrated into the Arabic world. Constantine and the Roman Empire wiped out the Hermeticists and the pagans, but Rome was also pagan, so it's really just one evil group wiping out another. And all of those things were absorbed into the secret orders of the Catholic Church, which of course still works today. It's just one pagan versus another, but one is the counterfeit. One is a counterfeit Christian power, whereas the other one was overtly pagan. And the overtly pagan stuff had to go. It wasn't going to work anymore with Christianity in the world. So the devil had to create a counterfeit to be like God. And of course, that's the Catholic Church. The mysteries were subsumed into Rome. And after Alexandria burned down, Rome basically became the storehouse for all of the occult knowledge. And that increased with things like the Crusades, where you had the Templars going into the Middle East and being influenced by things like the Assassins, which were the Muslim secret societies, secret orders, the Kabbalah through rabbinic Judaism. And they brought it all back to Rome. Of course, you know that the Templars were eventually disbanded for all of their satanic rituals and crazy things that they were doing. But the Templars ran away. And there's a whole series that I'm going to be doing on secret societies called the Synagogue of Satan. The Templars ran away and they cross-pollinated with the Freemasons. But the Masons were they were an order of builders. And what happened was that order started to accept non-builders into it. And this is how they cross-pollinated and became the Freemasons of today. Freemasonry today was influenced and shaped by the Templars. And the Templars basically were the foundation of all these other secret societies. The Catholic Church, really, imported all of these mystery religions and propagated these secret societies. Of course, the Assassins existed before the Catholic Church, before the Templars. But really, you could go either way too, because the Catholic Church, in my video, did the Catholic Church start Islam? Some people believe that the Catholic Church created Islam, so there's that. I try to walk a narrow road and say, look, at the very least, the existence of the Catholic Church led to the rise of Islam for many reasons. Muhammad was a perfect false prophet for the devil to use, because the Arabs wanted their own Christ, their own religion. They wanted their own pope. They wanted to have significance. And so they were ripe for deception. And again, it was time to move away from paganism. That wasn't working anymore. So we need like monotheism. We need, counterfeit Christianity. And Islam in many ways is a harlot daughter. It's a Unitarian harlot daughter of Rome. And I talk about that in that video. So it's very fascinating how the relationship between these two. But the point is that, what is the point? The point is that this mystery religion, this mystery tradition has traveled through time. You can see the devil constantly jumping from one platform to the other as the other one disintegrates, because everything has an expiration date, and moving this knowledge to different places and actualizing it eventually. in the Catholic Church. Today, of course, there's Rosicrucians, Freemasons, Illuminati, Templars, Jesuits everywhere. You'll see everywhere with secret societies and heliocentric study. They're all tied to Hermeticism, which of course goes back to the very beginning, the forbidden fruit. Now, I want to talk about the Islamic world and finish this up because that was around 800 to 900 AD. Remember that in episode 3, when we looked at ancient cosmologies, that the Quran teaches an enclosed cosmology. We'll review that today a little bit. And there are other verses in the Quran that we didn't look at that discuss an enclosed cosmology, a flat plane, a firmament, many layers of the firmament. Now, of course, the Bible doesn't say many layers, but the point is the Quran teaches an enclosed flat cosmology. However, the Arabic world was quickly infiltrated by by Gnosticism, really, it's paganism, but it was very quickly influenced by Gnosticism and secret societies. Abdullah ibn Mayyam, that's the guy's name, Abdullah ibn Mayyam, a Jewish wealthy mystic, took over. Then you had the assassins, the Fatimites, and all these other secret orders and so on. And those things persist today. That's why the Catholic Church controls all of these places, because it's all behind the scenes with secret societies and secret orders. And of course, the Jesuits control all of these things in the end. So let's see. This is cosmology in the Muslim world. Overview. In Quranic cosmology, cosmography, the cosmos is primarily constituted of 7 heavens and firmament. The firmament is solid structures and are held up by God's power and without visible pillars. Without visible pillars. Above them is the throne of God, a solid structure. The Quran indicates a round earth, i.e. circular, not globe, and says that the physical land on the ground has been spread. So we talked about this, how the heavens and the earth are, it's a flat plane with a covering of some kind. But now we have to look at how that evolved out. Just like the Indians, just like the Greeks, everything flipped from one to another, from truth to error. Multiverse. Al-Ghazali, the incoherence of the philosophers, defends the Ash'ari doctrine of a created universe that is temporally finite against the Aristotelian doctrine of an eternal universe. In doing so, he proposed the modal theory of possible worlds, arguing that the actual world is the best of all possible worlds from among all alternate timelines and world histories that God could have possibly created. Al-Razi, in his Matalib al-Aliyah, explores the possibility that a multiverse exists in his interpretation of the Quranic verse, all praise belongs to God, Lord of the worlds. So what's the point we're getting into is that people later, because they were Gnostics, because they were mystics, because they were secret society members, and all this stuff was floating around, they started to reinterpret the Quran with things like the multiverse. So the multiverse is not 100 years old, folks. It's a very old idea because of the spiritual implications that it has. Al-Razi decides that God is capable of creating as many universes as he wishes, and that prior arguments for assuming the existence of a single universe are weak. And, quote, it is established by evidence that there exists beyond the world a void without a terminal limit. And it is established as well by evidence that God Most High has power over all contingent beings. Therefore, he, the Most High, has the power to create 1,000 worlds beyond this world, such that each one of those worlds be bigger and more massive than this world, as well as having the like of what this world has of the throne, the chair, the heavens, and the earth, and the sun and the moon. The arguments of the philosophers for establishing that the world is one are weak, flimsy arguments founded upon feeble premises. What does the Bible say? The Bible says there's only one world, one universe, to reveal God's plan of salvation. If there are multiple universes, do you see how the devil can use that to confuse you into all sorts of deceptions? And of course, they do happen today. For example, multiverse, people believe that we're in a simulation. So there you go. The simulation's what's happening, and you don't need to, you don't need Christ. You need to basically find a way to transcend the simulation, or maybe you need to, log into the digital world, and that's how you do it. Or if you know the particular doctrine called Molinism, this is an advanced topic that I'm going to be talking about in my Salvation series, but it was made by a Jesuit named something Molina. I forget his first name, but made by a Jesuit. And of course, the doctrine is just so seductive and so, gosh, if you have heard it, then you know what I'm talking about, because it seems like it reconciles predestination and free will, but it really doesn't. All it does is attack the gospel, and it attacks the certainty in God's work in salvation by using all of these multiple universes and saying, well, God, the one we're in, he's created the best possible. It's a whole can of worms. I'm not even going to open up, but just know that it was created by a Jesuit and it relies on multiple worlds. So just know that the devil has an agenda to destroy true Christians, to destroy your faith, to distract you from the truth with everything that he does. So when you see something like this with multiple worlds, people start reinterpreting the Quran, you realize that this is a very old idea, not just something that came 100 years ago. Al-Razi therefore rejected the Aristotelian and Avicennian notions of the impossibility of multiple universes, and he spent a few pages rebutting the main Aristotelian arguments in this respect. This followed from his affirmation of atomism, as advocated by the Ash'ari school of Islamic theology, which entails the existence of vacant space in which the atoms move, combine, and separate. Do you see the mechanistic aspects coming forth through Islam of science and how that prompted the separation between science and spirituality eventually, and then so they can reunite through quantum? And it's just profound. All the dark to light schemes that are constantly going on through history. The devil has been incredibly busy. He discussed in greater detail the void, the empty space between stars and constellations in the universe in volume 5 of Matalib. He argued that there exists an infinite outer space beyond the known world. This is ancient Islam, folks. And that God has the power to fill the vacuum with an infinite number of universes. There you go. So all the things that you believe today about the heliocentric, and look, we've all been there. I'm not judging anybody, but you have to realize where they come from. They don't come from science. This is philosophy. This is one occult philosopher trying to refute another occult philosopher based on philosophical arguments. Well, God is so powerful that he must be able to create multiple worlds. Have you measured these multiple worlds? No, it's a philosophical conjecture. Fighting another philosopher, Aristotle, who said the universe was eternal and there's one. Which I guess, in that sense, it's true in some sense. The universe hasn't been around forever, but there is only one universe. And so there's that. But let's see, there's something else here that I wanted to highlight. Astronomy, reception of Hellenistic astronomy. Much of the 9th century astronomy in the Islamic world revolved around the dissemination of the astronomical work of Ptolemy, primarily through his Almagest. Translations of it were produced, and summaries and commentaries of it were also written. In 850, Al-Farghani wrote his own summary of the work titled Kitab fi Jawni some Arabic name I can't pronounce, a compendium of the science of stars, a summary of the Ptolemaic cosmography. So Ptolemy, the Hellenistic model of the universe, was very much being disseminated into ancient Islam. But remember that quickly changed as other things were changing to go to this new thing, this new system. It's really not, and it's not new at all, it's just old, but it's being repackaged as new. The primary purpose of the work was to help explicate Ptolemy's, but it also included some corrections based on the findings of earlier Arab astronomers. Al-Farghani gave revised values of the obliquity of the ecliptic and precessional movement of the apogees of the sun and the moon, and the circumference of the earth. So are we talking old cosmology or new cosmology? The books were widely circulated through the Muslim world and even translated into Latin. Under the Caliph al-Mayyum, an astronomical program was instituted in Baghdad and Damascus with the stated intention of verifying Ptolemy's observations by comparing the predictions made from his models with new observations. The findings were compiled into a book called Al-Zij al-Mutahan, the Verifiable Tables, which is widely quoted in later astronomers, but itself is no longer existing. Early heliocentric models. The Hellenistic Greek astronomer Seleucus of Seleucia, who advocated a heliocentric model in the 2nd century BC. Remember why? Eratosthenes, before him Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras. So this is old stuff being migrated through these various empires because all the empires crumble and fall and get judged. This guy wrote a work that was later translated into Arabic. A fragment of his work has survived only in Arabic translation, which was later referred to by the Persian philosopher Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, 865 to 925. In the late 9th century, Jafar ibn Muhammad Abu Mashar al-Balkhi developed a planetary model which some have interpreted as a heliocentric model. This is due to his orbital revolutions of the planets being given as heliocentric revolutions rather than geocentric revolutions, which Ptolemy was geocentric. And the only known planetary theory in which this occurs is in the heliocentric theory. His work on planetary theory has not survived, but his astronomical data was later recorded by al-Hashimi, Abu Rai-Biruni, and al-Sijni. In the early 11th century, al-Biruni had met several Indian scholars. There we go. Remember what I told you about the cross-pollination of the East into the Muslim world? He met several Indian scholars. This is the 11th century, around 1000. Also when the Crusades were happening too, which is interesting, who believed in a rotating Earth. In his Indica, he discusses the theories on the Earth's rotation supported by Brahmagupta and other Indian astronomers, while in his canon Masudicus, al-Biruni writes that Aryabhata's followers assigned the first movement from east to west to the Earth and a second movement from west to east to the fixed stars. Al-Biruni also wrote that al-Sijni also believed the Earth was moving and invented an astrolabe called the Zuraki based on this idea. Early Hayya program. Ibn al-Haytham, Latinized as al-Hazen, wrote a work in the Hayya tradition of Islamic astronomy known as al-Shukuk, Doubts on Ptolemy. He criticized Ptolemy's astronomical system on theoretical grounds, but also sought reconciliation with it. Ibn al-Haytham developed a physical structure of the Ptolemaic system in his treatise on the configuration of the worlds, which became an influential work in the Hayya tradition. In his Epitome of Astronomy, he insisted that heavenly bodies were accountable to the laws of physics. In 1038, Ibn al-Haytham described the first non-Ptolemaic configuration in the model of the motions. So again, this is right around when the Crusades were happening. And they cross-pollinated with the Indian mystics, who believed the Earth was rotating, who started to believe the Earth was rotating and round. And the Templars came there too and got some of that as well. His reform was not concerned with cosmology, as he developed a systematic study of celestial kinematics that was completely geometric. This in turn led to innovative developments in infinitesimal geometry. His reformed model was the first to reject the equant and eccentrics, separate natural philosophy from astronomy, free celestial kinematics from cosmology, and reduce physical entities to geometrical entities, i.e., he was the first to really mathematize things. The model also propounded the Earth's rotation about its axis, and the centers of motion were geometric points, without any physical significance, like Johannes Kepler modeled centuries later. I wonder where Kepler got his ideas. In 1030, Abu al-Raik al-Biruni discussed the Indian planetary theories of Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, and Varamahira in his Latinized Indica treatise. Al-Biruni agreed with the Earth's rotation about its own axis, and while he was initially neutral regarding the heliocentric and geocentric models, he eventually came to reject heliocentrism towards the end of his life. He remarked that if the Earth rotates on its axis and moves around the Sun, it would remain consistent with his astronomical parameters. Quote, "Rotation of the Earth would in no way invalidate astronomical calculations, for all the astronomical data are as explicable in terms of the one theory or as the other. The problem is thus difficult of solution." Why is this quote so important, folks? This quote was about 1,000 years ago. And you're going to see the same exact quote from modern physicists, i.e., what you see can be explained by the Earth moving or the Earth standing still and the celestial bodies moving. It doesn't matter, because math is math. Math is a relationship. One thing is moving and one thing is not. As long as there's that relationship, you can mathematize it either direction. If you choose that the Earth is moving, even though it's not, and the heavens are still, then you can do math to justify your observations. If you choose that the Earth is stationary and the heavens are moving, your assumptions totally change, and you can mathematize that into a model. You have to realize that math is about relationships, and you have a man from 1,000 years ago who obviously was very involved in occult traditions and mystery religions and being cross-pollinated with all these mystics, telling you that it doesn't matter whether the Earth is moving or not. He rejected heliocentrism in the sense that he believed in the Ptolemaic model where Earth is stationary. in the universe, although it seems he believes that the Earth was also rotating around its axis. But either way, he's telling you that it doesn't matter. Math is math. And he was the one that really started to mathematize everything, which is very important. There's more history here we won't go over, but as you can see, these things were cross-pollinating more and more throughout history. So remember that Gnosticism was all over the world through Hermeticism, Manichaeism, if you know what that is. That was a huge, not an empire, but like a belief system around the 3rd and 4th centuries was when it, believe, got taken out by the Roman Empire. But the point is this: we see an unbroken line of influence from ancient Egypt, which of course took the traditions from Babel and Nimrod and Semiramis and Tammuz and all these things. They took those traditions. That tradition migrated through these various pagan empires like Assyria, Babylon to Greece, all the way to Rome, to the Arabic world, and of course then back to Rome through the Crusades, and so on and so forth. And of course you also had the Indian, Eastern traditions link up into that too. So Satan is weaving his tapestry throughout history. And again, if you don't have the bird's eye view, you don't see the tapestry. You don't see the work of the enemy throughout history. And so you think that what you believe today is, well, it's just science. It must be. But it's not. It's an occult belief system. The Quran teaches a flat earth. But again, after Muhammad, you had Abdullah ibn Mayam, who was a mystic, and he took over and made things Gnostic. See, my video, Did the Catholic Church Create Islam? To understand the Gnostic and the occult relationships between the Catholic Church and the religion of Islam. Greek philosophy also influenced Islamic thinking for centuries because you had the Greek philosophers and their systems, and initially it was accepted. Hellenistic philosophy was accepted in the Muslim world, and then the Muslims wanted their own identity and their own way of doing things, and so they rebelled to it, and they cross-pollinated with the Indians, with the Indian mystics, and so dark to light, constant ping pong. And of course, this is how the devil was working through history. So in order to create a more pure Arabic science, they started to rebel against the Hellenistic model, and they started to accept things like the earth rotating and mathematizing all these things. And you had these people, like I just read, I don't remember their names, but these people started to mathematize the model and put forward a heliocentric idea around 1000 AD, around the time of the Crusades as well. More and more people began coming up with the ideas that we see today. The revolution of the earth, the revolution of bodies on an axis, space, multiverse, all these things are very old, folks. They're not from the 1900s. They're from the thousands AD and probably even before that. All these things have been in the oven for quite a long time. I remember all the cross-pollination with the Indians, with the Middle Ages, with the, Crusades. And of course, eventually, you have the Reformation, which is our next point in time, with our next topic to talk about. And the important thing is that the Catholic Church did not openly teach these things up until the Reformation, which is a very interesting thing. The Catholic Church wasn't really super aggressive with cosmology in its teachings because the Catholic Church was dominant. It had no reason to change cosmology. Of course, Rome had all of the esoteric texts and all of the occult knowledge, but they didn't care. They didn't have any reason to do anything in Europe as far as cosmology, like the Muslims did in rebelling against the Greeks and having their own identity. The Catholic Church was iron fist for 1260 years. Up until the Reformation, really, the first 1,000 years of the Catholic Church, from 300, 20 AD to 1300, 1400 AD, that 1,000 years was completely dominant. It had no reason to address cosmology, even though they had all the occult texts. And of course, through the Crusades, they got even more occult knowledge and more occult texts, more occult cross-pollination. And when the Reformation happened, they pulled out all of these weapons through the Jesuits. You'll see for yourself. It's really fascinating. But again, Rome had this storage house of the occult, and they had no reason to use it up until people started to rebel against Rome, and Rome's power seemed like it was crumbling through the Reformation. Rome did track the movements of the sun and the luminaries quite a bit. I talk about this in my number 5 episode in the Sabbath series on the lunar Sabbaths, a pretty long episode. It's about 6 hours, but it's very, very in-depth and stuff that you're not going to really find in most places. Nobody understands the true calendar that God gave the Israelites. And of course, that calendar is not in use today. It's not the Hebrew calendar. It's the calendar of the sun's position in the constellations. And the sun has a specific cycle that it goes through in a solar cycle. 365.21 days or something like that. Well, that cycle, when you are comparing it to when it's a relationship, God's about relationships. When it's a relationship between the sun and the constellations, it's a perfect year. No need to intercalate. There are only 12 constellations in the sky at all times. So the sun's position in a particular constellation determines a period of time, a 12th of the year. Now that 12th is not even. It's, maybe 20 days, it may be 40 days, depending on the size of the constellation, but it was always complete, meaning there was no intercalation needed. Well, anyway, we talk about that quite a bit, but you see, the Catholic Church knew these things because you see, what's the point now with the Catholic Church? The Catholic Church, I document in that video, and you can look into this for yourself. The Catholic Church, these old cathedrals all had zodiac signs and the sun's position in a particular constellation on a given day. And they would track that very intimately. And there's a big rabbit hole there. Of course, a lot of people who are involved with the Tartaria thing are all about, this thing, oh, look, the old system in Tartaria. Well, yes and no. There's no Tartaria. Tartaria is a psyop designed to make you glorify the old world order, i.e. the new world order that's coming, going back to secret knowledge. So don't fall for it, but history is not what you've been told, that's for sure. Absolutely. I'm not so sure what happened with the whole mud flood thing. There are some strange things that have happened in history, folks. They really have. We don't, like with the repopulation of the 1800s and sending all these orphans to various countries, that's really weird. There is some strange evidence with these buildings that are covered in mud and there's like a whole bunch left underneath that seems to have been repurposed. There's just some really weird stuff. However, you got to walk the narrow road because there are also a lot of these buildings that people say, look, they were built so advanced. There are pictures of them being built. I'm not saying that that's the absolute. I'm saying that we have to walk a narrow road. There are some questionable things with history, like with the renovation of Paris. Was it 20 years they built the whole thing? I mean, they renovated everything. It doesn't make sense. And some of these buildings in Australia, for example, that are built with just prisoners and, barely any equipment, and they're Victorians type buildings. It's strange. It really is strange. But nevertheless, the Catholic Church, the cathedrals of the Catholic Church, these old cathedrals, all have zodiacs on the floor, and they have a very precise measurement of the sun's rays and going into various positions. So check that out if you're interested in it. But the point is this, the snake knows the truth, folks. The snake knows the cosmology, the correct cosmology, knows the truth. The Catholic Church has all of the occult knowledge from Egypt and Babylon and Greece and Rome and everything else. All of that has been centered in Rome. Remember, Revelation 13:2, the devil gave the beast its power and throne and great authority. Meaning out of all the Antichrist vehicles on the earth, and there's plenty, the devil chose the seat of the Pope in Rome, and Rome in general to be the center foci of his satanic activity. So they were tracking the heavens for centuries. They were tracking the movement of the sun. And of course, today, who has all of the observatories? The Lucifer telescope we'll talk about this in the future section. It's Catholic. The Vatican owns it. So they've always been tracking. They know the cosmology, and I'm sure that they're trying to investigate how to break through the firmament in some way. That's what they're trying to do. Who knows what they're doing, but they know the truth. Nevertheless, they never had a reason to weaponize cosmology up until the Reformation, which is a very interesting thing, because if we know that Rome had all of this occult knowledge and then suddenly chooses to weaponize it as a result of the Reformation, what does that tell you? It tells you that heliocentrism is a delusion, and it's a weapon of the enemy to try to destroy the Protestant Reformation, to try to destroy the biblical accuracy and destroy belief in the Bible, and to ultimately bring in a new world order under the beast. That's what it tells you. So we'll get to more of that as we go on, But the takeaway of today is the following. All of the ancient figures who influenced heliocentrism were major occultists. From the very beginning, heliocentric thought and heliocentrism has roots in the occult and mystery religion. It cannot be divorced from the occult. Hopefully, you see that. All the things that I've covered cannot be divorced from occult and occult philosophy. This is the point of today, really. If you can get one thing out of today, it is that heliocentrism is not a scientific belief. It is an occult belief, and it can never be divorced from occult and mystical belief systems. The devil was very busy inverting cosmology a long time ago through different places, flipping them here, flip them there, and eventually, of course, as of the cross, the devil chose the Catholic Church to migrate all of these things into, which is very important. And you can see now that we've outlined some of this history, how the mystery religion slowly has been woven into these various empires, leapfrog, and ultimately is going to coalesce in the Catholic Church from all of these threads, which of course is the next part, which is the Reformation and the Enlightenment.